Kobylt Live and our Little Italy podcast. Joining me is Joseph Orazi, who wrote this fabulous book, L'America. Is that how you say it, Joe?
L'America.
L'America.
L'America. The name of it is how the Italians used to say they were coming here. They were coming to L'America.
They were coming to L'America, which I remember my grandmother saying. So thank you very much for joining us. Terrific book. Finished it, loved it, made lots of little footnotes. And I feel like I know these three families already after reading this book. There's a lot to talk to you about. There's this book, there's a documentary you've done. Italian and Italian heritage is not new to you, right? Studying and writing about it. But this book in particular is very important. So why don't you tell us what it's about, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, actually, the genesis of this book was the documentary you mentioned. The documentary Prisoners Among Us, which was released in 2004, won the New York Independent Film Festival. It is a story of Italian-American immigration, assimilation, and the largely unknown events leading up to World War II.
Right.
I learned much more about my heritage, although I loved my Italian heritage. I used to sit at the feet of my grandparents and great aunts and uncles and listen to their stories. But when we did the research for the documentary, I learned so much more and gained an incredible respect for my ancestors that I decided to write a novel of historical fiction, which L'America is. The characters are composites of a lot of people in my family, people in the documentary, people I've researched, but the events are 100% accurate. It took me about 12 years to write the book, 10 of which, without exaggeration, were research.
Okay. Sorry to interrupt you, but that's why this book is so well done. Because the more research we do, the better the book, the better it's written, the richer the characters. And I know that the characters may be fictional, but it is based on real life events pretty much, right? So could you tell us a little bit about the three families that we follow through the book, and maybe start with us on the boat, right? The boat here leaving Naples and also Palermo, right?
Yeah, back in those days, this book, the Santa Ana, was actually a ship that transported immigrants from Italy. The Santa Ana was traveling back in 1915. Back then, it was about a 13 to 15-day voyage once it left Palermo or Naples for New York. And it was 13 brutal days. Most of the passengers were poor and were leaving Italy because they were poor, and so they had to. They only had the ability to buy tickets in steerage. Steerage is down in the belly of the beast, next to the engine room. It's a horrible existence. There were lots of rapes. There were murders, assaults. It was a very, very difficult journey. The interesting thing, by the way, Deborah, is that I never knew about this. When I listened to my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, they never talked about that. They didn't talk about how horrible the conditions were in southern Italy, for example, in Calabria, where my family's from, and the family from Calabria is from the Mosca family in the book. I only heard about how wonderful the old country was. I didn't hear about the starvation. I didn't hear that they had a piece of meat this big for every 6 weeks. I didn't hear that they were starving. I only heard about how wonderful the old country was, and I heard about the trip over, but I didn't hear about the brutality. And
well, it's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you, but of course the old country was wonderful to them because they were with their families. Right. And then they came over here. People were splintered. I know my maternal grandmother, she came over here alone at the age of 12 or 13. I mean, God only knows what happened in steerage to her there, and spoke very little English and tried to teach herself, because she lived with us toward the end of her life, by looking at the World Book Encyclopedia and looking at all the pictures. And we would communicate that well. I knew a little Italian, not enough. But it was kind of a beautiful thing. But you're right. They didn't speak too much about those days. They just talked about where they're from, I think because they miss their family. Do you think so?
Well, yes, I think that's part of it.
Yeah,
Italians, yeah, I don't want to put us in a box, but Italians are very proud people,
yeah,
and they with a very intense work ethic,
yeah.
faith, family, and a work ethic, which is what I hope I represent in this book. So when they faced the brutality, they didn't want to talk about it. They just wanted to talk about making a way for subsequent generations. I mean, we're sitting here talking because of what our ancestors endured. And keep in mind, like the poster says, I don't think you can see it on the screen, but like the poster says, this isn't just their story; it's your story too. I mean,
And
if
it,
you're a Native American, it's not your story. But virtually everyone came from somewhere else, and everyone endured this stuff.
well, as I was reading the book, I did think about that. I thought about my four grandparents who came here, and actually one of my great grandparents, I think, actually came first. But um, and then I thought about all the others who are coming now, today, and how difficult it is, and how there does need to be a system, right? But it's so difficult for them. They just want to get here where they feel like they can get something to eat. They can maybe get a fair shake at a job, but it's gotten so complicated. And back then, right? I know that we were not exactly treated with open arms when the Italian people came here. Can you talk a little bit to us about that? How Italians were received when they came here, and then let's please talk about the three families that we focus on in the book.
Okay. All right. Well, what happened to the Italians was no different than what happened to the Irish, what happened to the Germans, et cetera, et cetera. If you came here first, someone came after, you were persecuted. Someone came after you, you persecuted them. Someone came after them, they persecuted them. This was not unique, but it was unfortunate because people were different. And it doesn't matter if you're Italian or if you're African American, if you're Chinese, Asian. Um, if you're different, you're going to be treated different, and especially back in those days, we
Right.
were considered. I mean, the reason we were called guineas is because we were typically short and we resembled guinea hens, you know, so it was, there was all that typical stuff going on, and so they endured that. They did what they had to do. They rolled up their sleeves, went to work, and made a way for us. And the thing I want to tell you, though, and we'll talk about what happened later, the events leading up to World War II, which which are important. Uh, but I remember when I was writing the documentary. This is really important. When I was
Hmm.
writing the documentary, I was talking to my aunt, my mother's sister. My mother had passed away, and she became my second mother. And I was very, very proud of the documentary and the fact that I had been hired to write the script and associate produce this. And so I was telling her about the things. I was telling her about internment. I was telling her about relocation, which we'll talk about. And I was talking, about being labeled enemy aliens at the start of World War II. And her face was blank. She was just staring at me. And finally, she pointed her finger at me and she said, "Don't make a story about complainers. Italians aren't complainers." And I'll tell you from that moment on, the tenor of the documentary changed. I
Interesting.
decided what I wanted to do was to write a story about victory, not about, oh,
Hmm.
woe is me, not about reparations, not about, oh, look what everybody did to us. It was, look what we endured so that we could make a way in this country, so that we can make a way, most importantly, for subsequent generations.
Hmm.
So that's the tenor of the documentary, the tenor of the book, and ultimately, we hope, the tenor of the miniseries.
What was the year? What were the years that Italians came here from? It was from the late 1800s, right?
Yeah.
And also, how many in total came during that period of time?
Well, the book begins in 1915, but the vast majority of immigration happened the 1880s until
Mm.
they slammed the door in 1924. Most people don't know this, but we slammed the door. We stopped people coming in. Um,
From Italy,
from
or
anywhere,
from everywhere?
from anywhere.
Is- mm.
And then we had restrictions based on the
Wow.
population of the country of origin. You could have this many people come or that many people, but um, when people came here, um, they they came. Most of them came through Ellis Island, but they also came through New Orleans, they came through Baltimore, they came through Philadelphia. But most people know Ellis Island. That was the largest port of entry. And once they
Right.
came to Ellis Island, um, and 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 were inspected for diseases. I mean, if you had trachoma, which was an eye disease that was very common back in those days, you didn't get to step onto the mainland. You were put back on the boat and you went back over after your 13 brutal days of travel. You got 13
Mm.
more back. There was a lot of that going on, but what happens what happens in the book is that there are three families. One settles in New York, and they're tailors.
Mm.
One family settles in Cleveland. They're stonecutters, masons. And the stowaway from Palermo, Sicily, the 16-year-old street rat, settles ultimately in Monterey, California, hooks up with his uncle, who's a sardine fisherman. The Italians dominated sardine fishing on the West Coast back in those days.
Right.
And so their experiences were very different. The experiences in New York were very different from the experiences in Cleveland, which were very different from the experiences in California. And I wanted to give that broad brush. I didn't want to confine it to, oh, here we've got these people who are living in horrible tenements in New York, and because we see that all the time, although that existed, it's not the only experience. But
No, and I'm sure through your research you found that they were pretty much everywhere in America. We were surprised to find out that in Northern California, in the Mount Shasta area, there were many Italians who came and are still there, and they are loggers. That is what they did up there,
yes,
the logging community. And in fact, there's so many that someone wrote a book about it, and sadly she passed away. I'm trying to get a hold of it. But so we're sort of everywhere. But I like how you covered the country from east to west and right in between. Because you're right, that's where so many of them came to Monterey, clearly to New York, and right there in Cleveland, and pretty much in the center. So talk to me about their experiences. Is there something that you'd love to tell our audience that you think really hits home to the Italian American experience initially coming here?
Yeah, there's several things.
Yeah.
One is, I keep using the word endure, but it's accurate. In the book and in real life, many people who settled in urban areas, and let's talk about New York, for example,
Right.
had to do some pretty disgusting things in order to make a nickel a day. And one of those things that were available to them, since they were not skilled, a lot of them were agricultural people, and they weren't, planting tomatoes in New York City. But so
Right.
they became what are called rag and bone men. Now, a rag and bone man in those days, if you were lucky to get the job, you were given a big cart, hand-pulled cart, and a wicker basket put on your back, and one of those sticks like they use on the side of the highways to pick things up. And you go out about 5 o'clock in the morning and you walk the streets, and you're told to gather rags, broken glass, metal, and dead animals, and
Ooh.
fill your basket, dump it in the cart. When your cart's full at the end of the day, you go to this location, you dump the carts into the basement, and the women down there go through it and pick out what they can use, and generally will pay you about a nickel.
Oh,
The curious thing is, why dead animals? Well, dead animals because they would use their bones to make knife handles.
What did
So
you
there's
say, to make night meals?
knife handles, the handles of
Wow.
knives. Yes.
Wow.
And so there were a lot of rag and bone men in the urban areas, and there were people who were digging ditches, people were digging sewers, making streets, fishing. Um, in the Midwest, there were a lot of stone cutters and masons there, but there were also miners from the mining communities of Italy.
Hmm.
As a matter of fact, one year I was asked to come to a place called Heron, Illinois. Heron, Illinois is a big Italian American community. And in
Hmm.
fact, in the center of the town, they have the most extraordinary bocce courts. I
Love
mean,
bocce.
they love their courts. The certain timbers that they use, a composite of three different dirts and sands that make up the playing area. They're very, very, very passionate about their bocce, but they have a festival every year, and I was invited to show Prisoners Among Us, my documentary, and
Right.
that community here in Illinois developed a relationship with a sister community in northern Italy because they were both miners in the United States and miners in northern Italy. And so they would travel back and forth. So there were a lot of mining people. There were a lot of contractors, stonemasons, very, very talented. They built the churches. They cut statues. I mean, the vast majority of what you see in Washington D.C. On the tops of buildings were cut by Italian stonemasons.
Very, very interesting. Talk to me a little bit about your background, would you please? You are from Pittsburgh. How did your family get here? Tell me about your mom's side, your dad's side. And
Okay.
then I'd love to talk a little bit about your background, because it's quite varied in terms of what you studied, where you've worked, because you've got quite an esteemed career on your own here.
Well, I kept changing careers. I was trying to stay one step ahead of the authorities. So it was having to change.
Now. We talked about that. Wait, we
Okay,
talked
all
about
right.
that.
I won't bring that up. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, my family, when they came to this country, my grandparents, when they came to this country, settled in Pittsburgh and the surrounding areas. There
Yeah.
were big Italian American populations, like there are in a lot of places, and the vast majority of them were tailors. Uh, they sewed suits by hand.
Notice, people, the family in New York, in his book, they're tailors. So, there's a lot of real
That's
life.
the
I mean, a
connection.
lot of these,
Oh,
right,
absolutely.
these
Yeah,
characters are based on people
right,
that you've read about,
right.
that you personally know, which I
Yeah.
think is great. So, okay, so your family, they were
So
tailors. Go
my
ahead.
family settled in Pittsburgh, and my father was an engineer, and he eventually he went to work for a management consulting firm. And by the way, my freshman, sophomore, and junior years in high school, we lived in Europe because they had offices all over the world, and so we took advantage of that. We ended up 2 years in London and one glorious year in Milan, Italy, when I was a junior in high school. And that was just remarkable to be 16 years old and living in Italy was something pretty special.
Yeah.
But we came back to the United States where I graduated from high school near Pittsburgh, and then I went away to Villanova for college. Uh,
Right.
and I was going to be I was going into pre-law. I was going to become an attorney, and then I was going into politics, and eventually I was going to be president of the United States.
Yep.
Uh,
Not too late. Not too late for that,
yeah,
but keep
yeah,
going.
no, that is definitely true. But things changed. I discovered the theater and couldn't keep my eyes off it. And I was always a writer. I was encouraged when I was in junior high school by an English teacher to write because she saw something there. So I was
Right.
always a writer, but an actor? Nah, I had never been an actor. I was never in anything in high school. I found that I had a talent for that, and I became a member of what's called the Villanova Theater Company, which is an equity theater company. We did stuff in
Right.
New York, we did stuff in Philadelphia, I drove my parents crazy because they paid all this money for me to go to college, and what was I doing? Doing these
I don't
weird
know what
things.
I don't know what it is with that generation of parents where if you even mention that you wanted to be a writer or an actor, it was like, why did I pay all this money? Well, guess what?
Yeah,
It's a career. Hello. I
yeah.
don't think
Well,
it's that way anymore, but it certainly was when when I was growing up. But yeah,
well,
go ahead.
they came around. Now, when I graduated, I was literally a starving actor, and I really like to eat. So I ended up coming home and living with my parents, still writing for the theater. Came home, lived with my parents. I joined a program at a glass company where my father worked in southern New Jersey. They had by this time moved to southern New Jersey, and I joined a management trainee program, and I bought my first car, and that was pretty cool. You
Yeah,
know, I had money for the first time in my life.
right.
So I moved a little bit away from theater and those aspirations, and got into management. But I always wrote. You can write, doesn't matter where you are, you can write. So I
Hmm.
wrote for the theater, and some plays were done in different places. But I eventually, and that's a long story, but I'll tell you the bottom line, was asked during the writers' strike in 1984-85, and I wasn't a member of Writers Guild of America. I was asked by someone I knew who was the executive producer of an ABC soap opera called Ryan's Hope, to write some episodes under an assumed name during the writers' strike so that they could keep going. So I did.
Ah,
I wrote about 6 or 7 weeks of shows.
yeah.
They liked them, so they hired me under my real
Hmm.
name when the strike was over, and so I wrote for Brian. So there were a lot of good people on the show at the time, and it was
Hmm.
a great experience for me because you don't miss a deadline in television. 44
But
pages follow you everywhere.
let me ask you
Everywhere.
this: during this time, were you very connected to your Italian roots? Because you did grow up in Pittsburgh. You had Italian grandparents, Italian
Mhm.
parents. I mean, that's your career. But how did being Italian affect everything that you did, if you will,
Well,
or
I
didn't it?
think no, it did. It absolutely. I didn't necessarily know it, but it did. Now looking back, that for example, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, Italians have an incredible work ethic.
Yeah,
Um, and I watched my grandparents and great aunts and uncles and my parents work hard, no matter what they were doing. They worked hard. They were
yeah,
always working. If they weren't eating, they were working.
right.
And
Did was
and
there a lot? Go ahead, go ahead.
no, and so I assimilated that, but also a passion for my history, a
Mm,
passion for my heritage, and I'll get on my soapbox a little bit here. That's really important
mm,
in this country. We do not take history seriously. No one knows their history. No one cares about their history. Maybe a little snippet here or a snippet there, but they don't know their history. They don't know uh, what their ancestors accomplished in returning volumes of heritage and culture and ingenuity to the landscape of America,
hmm.
and that's really important. And so when ultimately I wrote the documentary, I wanted to make sure that that happened. And so I did. I learned the work ethic. I learned about faith and family, and the importance of sitting for hours around the dining room table. Uh,
Yeah.
I learned so much. And
Hmm.
by the way, it gave me I have good ears, and I'll explain that. It gave me um, the opportunity to write the dialogue that I wrote.
Mm.
because I listened to their dialogue and I made
Hmm.
notes. I was a musician back at the time too, and I think in terms of music, and I think in terms of notes and
Yeah.
and and rhythms, and so I learned all of that at an early age that enabled me to paint pictures when I write.
A little shout out, if you don't mind, to the award that you've won as a musician, because you are multi-talented musician. You've written for soaps. You've done an award-winning documentary. You wrote the first book called L'America, because I know there's a part two coming that you're working on. And this is also going to be, this is in currently in what I believe is development, right, for a web series. This
Mini.
book and part a mini series rather, and this book and also part two of the book, right? So super multi-talented guy. But quick shout out to the award that you have won in music.
So, but by the way, when I hear you say that, I'm thinking, why don't I just settle down? No,
No,
thing,
never,
you know?
Joe, never. We have too many stories to
Right.
tell. Keep going.
Yeah.
But what's
Okay.
that award that you won, please? Because
Oh,
everybody
okay.
knows
So
that song. Yeah.
there's a song. My brother owns is a recording engineer. He owns a recording studio. He and I have written together all our lives. And for a film, a documentary about dog rescue, I wrote a song called "Rescue You, Rescue Me," and it was nominated for an American Songwriting Award. Didn't get it,
Yeah.
but hey, the nomination was fine.
I've been nominated for plenty of awards I didn't get, and I will tell you, I'm equally as proud to be nominated as when I've won. I really do mean that, because it's an honor to be recognized for the work that you put so much into, really. So congratulations for that. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, that particular award, from what I understand, there are 10 people nominated worldwide. So
wonderful. So you've got all this ruminating right in your head. You studied at Villanova. You went and worked for the family. You were maybe going to go to law school, didn't go. But notice, I'm saying this to all those people listening out there and watching who are saying, gosh, where am I going? Sometimes all these different jobs are leading you to your purpose and where you're going, just like with Joe and so many of us, where we take on various jobs because it's in us. And then eventually what we're supposed to be comes out. Right, which is, I think, where you've landed. This is your purpose here, Joe. I mean, our history, our collective history, the three families you've written about in L'America. Tell me a little bit about the series that they are working on, would you please?
All right, so I did the book. You had an image of it. Part one goes from 1915 to 1927. I'm about 20 chapters into part two, which takes us to 1947. The miniseries project came along before I finished part two, but the miniseries goes from 1915 to 1947. And because I know the rest of the stories, and it's possible that the miniseries is going to be released before book two is released. But
wow,
that was very interesting. Someone out in Beverly Hills, who you know, found the book. Alexia Malocki from Little Studio Films found the book, apparently loved it. We got connected. I thought it was a scam, because a lot of people contact me about my book and wanted to make me a millionaire, but there's a lot of problems out there. But so I let it lie for a while, but then there was something in me that said, you know what, let's check this woman out. And so I did, and found out that she was legit. And not only that, she was Italian.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we talked, and we talked about possibly working toward developing this story into a limited television series, like a 12-part miniseries, which, as I was writing, I was thinking in those terms anyway. I think very visual. But then what happened was we suddenly had interested investors. So they stepped up to the table.
That's everything, right? Yeah, go ahead.
And that became, and so all of a sudden we could take it to another level, and which is what's happening right now. It's in development. There are all of these elements that have to be satisfied so that you can have a seat at the table with the big boys, with the Netflix and the Paramounts of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The Netflix and the Paramounts and others of the world have expressed interest. And this is my first rodeo in terms of that world, but I'm told, and this doesn't happen like this is happening. It's happening fast. And apparently, the Italian community in Hollywood has been looking for a project that doesn't focus on the mob, but focuses on the true immigration and assimilation experience. And so they have jumped on this, and it's very satisfying. I mean, we don't just off people and own pizza joints. There's a lot that we do and have done that is remarkable as a group. Italians are passionate people. I don't want to stereotype us, but we're passionate people. We're creative people.
Yeah.
And
Proud.
yeah, and well, when you mentioned that, okay, I want to take a moment and tell you something. Toward the end of book 2, toward the end of the miniseries, when we enter World War II, what happened was things changed for Italians in America when Mussolini sided with the Axis powers. So he became Hitler's buddy. And all of a sudden, the government in the United States said, whoa, we got all these Italians. We have 600,000 of them who are not American citizens. What are we going to do about them? They could be forming the fifth column. We don't know. They could be trying to destroy us from within. And so they issued a proclamation, labeled 600,000 non-citizen Italians as enemy aliens, gave them travel restrictions, curfews, took away their flashlights, broke into their houses and took their cameras and their radios. And some of them were interned. Ironically, some of them were interned on Ellis Island, the very place they came to for Renaissance. Ended up being a place where they were interned. And so there's a lot of stuff in the book about those things that people don't know about internment. On the West Coast, it was decided in their infinite wisdom that the government would have to relocate non-citizen Italians. They drew arbitrary lines of demarcation that were east of the urban areas and said to Italians, you go east. Board up your house, board up your business, go east. We don't care where you go, but you just can't be this close to the shore. God forbid these old women should signal the submarines.
Right. I mean, it was truly brutal. And that really comes out in your book because it's true. This is what happened. I mean, I was recently at the Italian American Museum down in Los Angeles, and I will tell you, there are photos and stories about lynchings that would happen to Italians that a lot of people do not know happened. Very often that, people were, they were accused of crimes that were not committed and sentenced to death. I mean, it was very, very sad. And I know you bring that up also in the book as well. Especially toward the end of the book, I found a couple of those stories very fascinating, but incredibly sad.
When you mentioned the lynchings, that happened in New Orleans. Italians were accused of assassinating Chief Hennessy, who was the chief of police at the time, the late 1800s. And so they rounded up a bunch of Italians, and then a vigilante mob stormed the jail cell and I think there were 9 of them, took them out and lynched them. And that's in my documentary. But the thing is that it's really important to me that we give to a larger audience, and I'm hoping the miniseries will do this. We give to a larger audience the true story of the immigration and assimilation experience,
Hmm.
and show people, that there are tons of things that our ancestors contributed to, that we people need to learn about. People need to know about. People need to respect their ancestors for what they did. And I know I keep saying the same thing over and over again, but it's really important to me that if I do nothing else through this book and through this mini series, is I tell the story of who you are, um, and how you got here.
Yeah. And I think we were mentioning off camera, we were talking about this. I think younger people, younger Italian Americans and Italians um, really want to know these stories. But
Yeah,
we also, you know, how we were talking about, you were speaking earlier about mob pictures. In other words, Italians in the mob. I think a lot of young people, at least I hope so, are starting to pull away from that. They know who we are. They know our contributions now because we've been here long enough, 100+ years, making our contributions in business and in the arts and fashion and then some. And I feel like that dialogue is changing, and it's changing especially because of, you know, by understanding our history, that's how we change things, right? And you've
absolutely.
really, yeah, and you've chronicled this beautifully, whether it's your documentary, this book, the upcoming series, which I know is going to be fantastic, your new book that you're working on. Really, I applaud you for this because
Thank you.
and I for anyone who's curious about their heritage, if you're Italian American or anyone, this is everybody's story, people. This book and Joe's work is about the Italian and Italian American, but this is everybody's story, as he said, who came here. So, because somebody came here, again, unless you're the natives who were here first.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful book, but it gets us all thinking, right? And that's what a good book does.
Well, I
So
hope so. And actually, the tagline on the poster for the mini series is, "It's not just their story; it's your story too." I
yeah,
remember
beautiful.
when we did the documentary and we presented at the New York Film Festival. We had a booth there, and after one of
Yeah,
the screenings, I was at the booth and I was talking to people who came up, and there was an Asian couple who came up to me, and they said,
yeah,
"Yeah, I know we're not Italian, but I guarantee you, this is my story,"
that's right.
and that stuck with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so astute and so curious about our heritage because it led to this, and this is going to be a gift for all of us. I'd love to have you back. I'd love to cherry pick a little more about what you're doing and when the new book comes out and when we get some clearances about the film. I know how it goes. It takes a few years to make this, probably various locations, but it's going to
Absolutely.
happen. Any parting words that you want our audience to know, that you'd like people to know about you, the book, the journey?
Well, be curious. I like that
Mm,
word. Be curious about your heritage.
yeah.
You will be the better for it. And if you want to read about the Italians' experience as best as I could, research it and portray it, you can go to Amazon.com to find L'America. It's also
Hmm.
Barnes and Noble. There is a website, lamericaseries.com, no apostrophe, just lamericaseries.com. And there's what's called a mood trailer. If you click on that video, you will get a 2.5 minute trailer, not the actual actors, but it'll be a representation of the tenor of the mini series.
Mm,
So
pretty
I take a look at that.
pretty fabulous because I've done that. It's really incredible. Joe Orazi, L'America. Thank you so much for joining us, and please pick up the book. It's a great read. I really did look at it that it's about all of us and about all of our people who came here, and it was fascinating. I got very wrapped up in the characters, particularly the ones from back east, because my family landed in Ellis Island, and half of them went to New York, half of them went to New Jersey. I'm the Jersey side, and I just saw a lot of similarities, and I think a lot of you will too. It's a beautiful read. So, Joe, I thank you again for joining us. Beautiful, beautiful book, and for taking the time. for
Thank you
all
for
of us.
having me. I really appreciate it. Maybe we'll catch up when I come out to LA beginning of November.
Oh, definitely. I expect to. No, I'm looking forward to it very, very much. And we'll have you over for a big Italian meal. If not, we'll see you at the upcoming festival because I know
Sure.
there's a lot of stuff going on out here.
Yeah.
So, everybody, you can find our show on all video and audio platforms, whether it's YouTube, iHeartRadio, you name it, we're there under Deborah Kobylt Live and Little Italy podcast, who simulcast our show. And I look forward to hearing from all of you too, because this is a great story, and Joe's doing incredible things to put a spotlight on our history and heritage. Make sure to pick up the book, check out the trailer, and all that. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.